This week on the pod, we speak with Vahakn Vorperian, professional retoucher extraordinaire with decades of experience in the industry. He covers his top tips for retouching, his pet peeves, and we discover Tom's weird retouching love. The less said, the better. We also want to take this opportunity to say send us your questions. We're collating listeners' questions for an exciting upcoming episode. But in the meantime, enjoy the show.
Greg, how are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. I'm probably about as tired as you look.
No, I don't know what you're talking about. I feel incredibly sprightly.
We're both just sat here yawning at one another.
It's been a fascinating preamble. We've really enjoyed it.
We've saved all the good stuff for you. So yeah, this week on the show we have an amazing retoucher that we're bringing you, Vahakn Vorperian. Have I said his name correctly?
You have.
Good. It's a bit of a mouthful. It's a great name though. Sounds like a supervillain.
To be fair, he's like the anti supervillain. He's like the nicest guy on the planet.
Absolutely, yeah. But the Vorperian has got this kind of strong sounding, I don't know, like Marvel comic book superhero vibes to it.
Well, I mean, look, what he does do is his superpower is retouching. Right,
Indeed.
Like this is, we thought it would be great to have him on. Retouching is like a horrible dark art. We all have tried to do really high level stuff, or I struggle to get to that point, but we've all tried. But what these guys do and what Vahakn can do is honestly on another level. So we just thought it'd be really good to do an episode on retouching. So Greg, tell me, do you do your own stuff?
Depends on the job. Normally, I will, probably for about 80% of my work, I'll do it myself. Mm-hmm. That is because most of my work isn't really heavily retouched,
right?
And doesn't require kind of skills beyond my own, like what I can do myself, basically. Mm-hmm. I mean, I personally would always want to be in control of grading my work and kind of the colour side of things. But I'll get retouchers involved if there's a particularly picky client or specialist request, or it involves lots of plates. Mm-hmm. But generally, I do it myself, which is a mixed bag, because then you kind of, what I find invariably is I'll retouch something, and you kind of need to look at it a couple of times after you've retouched it, but a few days later.
Well, it's interesting because before we came on the air, I was just like, I'm going to talk about fresh eyes. You've literally just described what my big surprise was going to be. Yeah, fresh eyes. It's exactly that. You literally take it, the more and more you stare at an image, the more you totally get used to the contrast in it, the colours, and then you just, your brain just absorbs that as normal. So then when you go away, you make a cup of tea and go for a wee or whatnot, you come back and you're like, oh my God, that looks horrendous. That's way too much contrast. That's way too much colour. The skin tone looks really yellow, or, whatever. Not that I've obviously had all three of those things in the past couple of weeks. But, fresh eyes it's brilliant. You take a little bit of time away, whether it is, a couple of days or just making a cup of tea. And then you come back and then you can, imagine seeing that image for the first time afresh. You can instantly tell whether it's too much.
Well, the thing I always find as well is nowadays, that when going back kind of 10 years, when you're retouching, you were generally retouching for print, whereas now so much stuff is viewed online, and we all spend kind of silly money on fancy monitors and calibration and what have you.
Do we?
We'll get onto that, Tom. I have a monitor at home, and I have the same monitor in the studio.
Humble brag.
Well, no, just because I have to have two. They're not, the most expensive of monitors. They're kind of like mid-range monitors. But I use the BenQ line. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, even with them calibrated, you start to look at it on your Mac, on your MacBook or whatever else, your main computer is. And you're like, well, actually, this screen is what most people are going to see it on. Not this screen over here that supposedly shows how many million true colours. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately it feels a bit pointless at times. You're kind of like, well, if everyone's viewing it on here and it doesn't look right on this screen, why am I spending all the time calibrating on this fancy screen over here?
Yeah, I know. I hear you. Do you know what I've been doing for probably about midway through lockdown? You know, I have a Stream Deck on my desk which I run my entire life from.
Yeah.
Anyone who doesn't know what a Stream Deck is, it's like a panel with lots of little buttons on it that are programmable. And I use, I've talked about Keyboard Maestro and stuff on the show in the past, and everything's kind of punched in on this Stream Deck. Well, in Capture One and in Photoshop, I have little shortcuts to process out a version into Dropbox, which is then obviously synced straight away to my phone, so I can then check the file on my phone. It's honestly, it sounds like it's when these amazing like mixing and mastering engineers, they've got these £100,000 speakers and everything sounds amazing, but actually what they're doing is they're exporting a version to listen to the tinny headphones you get with the iPhone.
Yeah.
It's basically what we're doing. You have to make sure if it looks good on your BenQ or ISO or whatever you use, you need to make sure it looks good on the iPhone, because most of your work might be consumed through one of these screens.
Yeah.
So I found having the export to just literally just whack a process recipe or just export a file straight from Photoshop into the Dropbox to then open it up on the phone. I found that really useful.
Do you? I've always been tempted, although not majorly tempted, but I've always had my interest piqued by the screens that you can actually double as tablets that you can edit on.
Oh, the Wacom Cintiqs.
Cintiqs, yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously with iPads and Rocket Pad and things like that, I think is an app on the iPad where you can do something. Astropad.
Astropad, yeah.
The idea of being able to actually retouch straight onto an image is quite appealing, because there's something a bit more tactile about that, almost going back to the way that you would have printed in the darkroom, and the way that you actually... There's something about printing in the darkroom when you're dodging and burning it's almost like, I don't know, like a dance form.
Yeah, I know.
Very tactile about it.
I know exactly what you mean. Do you know the only reason I've never had one of them is two reasons. Number one, don't really have the real estate, because I already have a million gadgets on the desk. But secondly, I don't want to be craned over all the time. Like, I feel like a dinosaur most of the time, but I don't want to just be looking down.
Well, I'm sure, and the other thing is, I'm sure they're great, but I do wonder how long the screens last before they get a bit covered in little scratches from the pen.
I don't know about you guys, and this is, I don't want to get grim, because hang on, because we haven't talked about my glove yet, have we?
No,
we talk about that in this episode. I won't ruin it. Obviously, it's a fantastic and very weird thing. But my, I don't know if anyone else's graphics tablets, Wacoms, have gone a bit grim.
Yeah, they get a bit dirty, don't they?
Yeah, but also all the matte coating on mine has rubbed off, so mine's dead shiny. But it happens on every tablet I ever have. I think my sweat.
Got a polished Wacom.
When I'm working really hard, it takes the coating off the Wacom.
Furious retouching.
Well, this is it. Obviously, I'm retouching too hard.
In an angry frame of mind.
Maybe I should speak to Vahakn about how to kind of loosen my grip slightly.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a funny one. I don't know. The Cintiqs. I know a friend of mine. He absolutely swears by it. He really likes it. He's bought a. It's not a Wacom. It's one of these other slightly cheaper brands, but the screen's good. And yeah, he really likes the experience of it. But he sent me a picture of his desk, and he's got a pretty big desk.
Yeah,
and he's got it all kind of. But also, I think
you almost want something that pulls out, like a drawer that pulls out that you can store it on and then push it away when you finish using it.
Yeah, I mean that'd be like one of those old school keyboard trays.
Yeah, although I quite like the idea of sitting, like in an architect's or a draftsman's board kind of desk, the kind of curved desks.
Yeah, I'd like that.
That would be a much better way to work.
I did once see a 360 desk in an office. So you literally,
360 desk.
yeah. So it was a perfectly circular desk that you climbed underneath and got
That
into
just
a
sounds
chair
like
in the middle.
It just sounds like a prison, mate.
It effectively was. It was for the receptionist, and she had three computers that she was working on at the same time.
Did she like whiz around on a wheeled chair?
Yeah.
Between like some kind of mid-90s computer hacker.
She didn't whiz around. There was no room, so she just spun. She literally just.
Sure, there's laws against that kind of.
Well, I don't know. It was a long time ago. It was probably about 10 or so years ago. But I did often think, I don't really have the world's biggest office. Maybe a circular desk wouldn't be the baddest, like the worst idea. The baddest? The worst. But yeah, I decided against that.
Yeah, probably wise. Well, listen, we wanted to also ask our listeners for coming up episodes. We're going to do another Q&A at some point. So if you guys have got questions, please ping them into the Instagram or the email. And we want to try and collate like a bunch of questions that we can do a whole episode of the two of us waffling. Mm-hmm. This episode's quite a good long one, so we didn't want to take up too much of your time. And it says that we've got less than a minute of recording left, Tom. So
well, should we get to it?
We should.
All right. Without further ado, here's the latest episode. Enjoy it. On today's show, we are incredibly privileged to be joined by Vahakn Vorperian, who is one of the best retouchers in the world. He's been featured in the Lers's Digital Artists Worldwide, the Top 200. He has got some absolutely stunning work for editorial, advertising, commercial, TV, movies, you name it. He's probably done it. So, it's a great privilege to have you on the show. And thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you. This is nerve-wracking and let's do this.
V, let us hold your hand and talk and take you through the world of the exposed negative. It's nothing to be worried about. Much.
Thank you.
You are our first retoucher that we've had on the pod. I'm going to say that we've been looking to get a retoucher for a long time, so we've done pretty well getting you on board. Given your kind of back catalogue and the number of amazing photographers you've worked with, and the kind of, I think most of our listeners, if they pop to your website, they would see pictures that they've definitely seen on billboards and seen around. So it will kind of all make sense. Obviously, we've got links to everything in the show notes. So if anyone wants to see your stuff, it'll all be there. So let's kind of get started on. Give us a bit of background to yourself. I mean, how did you get started in retouching, and how long have you been doing this?
Oh God, I've been doing this since I had a bit more hair on my head. I started. I started off actually wanting to be a proper photographer, and that was my aim. Actually, I wanted to be an animator, and then I started studying photography and found that was really a beautiful medium to be involved in. And I went to college and everything, and I started assisting in the late 90s, early 2000s. I started assisting photographers, mostly for editorial. And I did that for about 6 years, and that was super fun. So much fun doing, Vogue shoots to kids catalog stuff. It was a blast. And then I started doing photography on my own, which I found incredibly difficult. Not in terms of like trying to get the work in, but more about dealing with these hurdles of people, like these gatekeepers that were, very much an ego gate that you had to jump over and appease and all that kind of stuff. And I wasn't very good at that.
I guess that was also like the transition. This transition period, wasn't it? Late 90s, early 2000s from film to digital.
Yeah.
Very,
I was
very early days of digital work.
Yeah, when people would, I remember a shoot in Cape Town where I saw the first probably phase one back being used, and the photographer was just, they had a big old hard drive with a bag and everything, and he was shooting away straight onto the hard drive, which I was like, what is this magic? But yeah, that was the early stages.
And so what did...
Sorry, I
mean,
just...
Tom,
I can't hear you, Tom.
I think you've muted yourself.
I muted myself because I'm a professional. You see, we've only done this a few times. This is our
I could see you
35th
gesticulating,
recording,
and I was like,
and I
what?
just, yeah. Do you know what? It's funny because when you said, "Oh, we had the first ever digital back," and I leant in and went, "Yeah, it was called the Phase 1," and then you guys totally did not. It didn't land.
Ignored you because we didn't hear you.
It was such a great gag, but anyway, sorry, apologies.
It's all right.
I was just going to say, no, it must have been amazing, because I kind of grew up, so my transition to digital kind of happened when I first moved to uni, and I remember kind of picking up my first digital camera, which was a Fujifilm Finepix S7000.
Ooh,
So, top of the range kind of thing at the time.
A bridge camera, weren't they?
It was a bridge camera, yeah, my only bridge camera I've ever owned.
Yeah.
But I remember literally holding it in my hand and just thinking, this is just like a box. I mean, obviously, I've always thought of cameras as like a little box of magic, but then this was just like, my God. So I imagine like seeing it on a bigger set, everyone's just kind of going in, being super excited and just completely wowed by it.
yeah,
It's got a whole 4 megapixels.
I think it was.
It was Imicon. Yeah, because it was the Imicon backs that went onto the Hasselblads originally.
I can't remember. I can't remember.
You can still buy them on eBay for about 300 quid, which at the time they were probably like 50 grand.
Yeah. I remember the
joys of
photographer
depreciating
saying,
value of kit.
yeah, that was a cool thing to see.
No, absolutely. So where did you then go after that?
So after that, when we came back, we did the big change was when I did Faking It on Channel 4. I was part of the team teaching this radiographer to turn photographer, and that was the moment where I was like, I really don't want to be a photographer anymore. That just changed the way I viewed everything and the attitude of everyone. I got really grumpy. And then I started revisiting what I loved, and I went back into the dark room and I was wet printing and color wet printing. That was brilliant. That was so much fun. And then I jumped onto a computer and started doing Photoshop again. And the original Photoshop I started working on was Photoshop 3, which was essentially just like layers and masks that worked just about.
Well, Photoshop 3, right? That was the first one to have layers. Yeah. You had one undo state.
Yeah.
Is that right? And
I think it was.
Yeah, I think there was like 2 layer blending modes.
Well, it was clunky.
Pretty. I mean, it was clunky, but it's super advanced for the time. I started using Photoshop at Photoshop 5, so by that point, it had really evolved. The Photoshop 3 is, I think, bizarrely, Petapixel have run an article about someone who's gone back and is using Photoshop 3 and experience now, having obviously come from the latest version of CC. They've gone back and tried to use it.
Why?
I don't think he's doing it professionally. I think he's done it as an experiment.
All right. I was like, what? How long do they want to spend on that job?
I'm going to use the most modern of softwares. It's Photoshop 3. It's from 1991. It's pretty good.
Listen, we've had all the kind of kickbacks to film. It's what the kids do these days. They go back to the retro. It's a new thing. They don't want to be spending their money on film development, so they're just all using Photoshop 3.
Tell you what, though, Photoshop.
I mean, it's cheaper.
What, doing Photoshop 3?
Well, than developing film, yeah, it's much cheaper.
Oh, right. Yes. Well, that's an amazing thing that's happening now. I'm seeing a resurgence of film coming through, which is nice. It's nice to see that from photographers.
No, I bet.
But I think these new photographers, they don't really know how to handle film. So there's a lot of kind of reworking of the negs, the scans. Some of the scans I've seen have been pretty you got to up your game on the scans so that when it comes on
I mean,
screen,
it's expensive, Yeah, I mean, it's also one of the most important parts of the process, and I think a lot of people, I have a lab that does some quick scans for me, and then I obviously do a deep dive on the ones that I really want. But yeah, it seems to be kind of film is just expensive in general. A couple of episodes back, we had a photographer called Jim Marsden on, and we were just talking about the rocketing price of film, and there's 20% price hikes on it, and it's all just become almost unattainable. And we were saying what a shame it is that there'll be a lot of young photographers now who would like to own a Hasselblad or like to shoot on a Leica or even a Mamiya or even a Zenza, like a Bronica or something, but the cost is just really prohibitive. So it's a shame. It is a shame.
it
But where
is,
did you?
and
So you
especially,
obviously Photoshop 3.
Yep.
Sorry, I was just going to say.
And
So
then,
we're going to go off. I think we're going to go a bit of a film photography tangent there. With Photoshop 3 was your first version. And you're still
but that
using
was at
today?
uni. I've gone right back to sketchpad and pen, scalpels and SAF mat.
Nice.
Airbrush, like trying to get those McDonald's
The actual airbrush, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, no, professionally, the first version of Photoshop I used was Photoshop 7, I think, and kicked off from there. And I started working professionally at Touch Digital, and I learned oh man, when I got that job, the boss there, Graham, who's a legend, he was like, V, can you retouch the skin? And I'd be like, yeah, of course. Not a clue how to do it. And I'd sit there and I'd basically just learn. I was on tutorials and reading articles and getting books and magazines, like what was the magazine at the time? Photoshop Art or I can't remember. But I was reading all of that, and
I remember that. Yeah.
So he thought I was being dead diligent by staying really late, and I was basically just learning what I had to do for the task he set me that day, essentially overnight, so that I could hand it in the next day. So yeah, that's how I learned.
Wow.
So he was like, "Yeah, can you do this?"
I mean, that's proper. That's
of
proper
course I
fake
can
it
do
till
that.
you make it stuff, isn't it?
It's something I learned,
And he was happy.
Like,
but he was happy with what you turned in.
I kept my job. Yeah, I kept my job for 5 years.
There we go.
4 years. Yeah, and I ended up.
Oh, okay.
I think at that
Nice.
stage, you've got kind of, you've got like in a way that you're faking it till you make it. You're also kind of at the cutting edge of where things were going. So in a way, kind of picking up those things from magazines, there probably weren't that many people that really knew how to do it, especially photographers themselves. It was everyone was in the same boat of learning, but you took the initiative to really kind of pick this up and run with it as a something that you wanted to get seriously into. Because I mean, obviously, even with photographers, there's so much that you don't learn from a course in photography that you then have to go, right, I've got to shoot, and this is a brief. How am I going to light this? How am I going to deliver it? What kind of technical things? And then you do find yourself, even I find myself still kind of looking up how to do something because it's going to come up on a job, and it's not something I've had to deal with before. But so yeah,
you've got to exude confidence.
Yeah, and I think it's just a natural thing, but you have to be a certain personality to kind of pursue those things, and to have that foresight. So you were obviously digging into this. Where did you where did this lead then? So
just because I started off at a very junior, obviously a junior level, very junior, and Graham was giving me so he had a deal with a picture library at the time. So there was a lot of scanning that I was doing. I was learning how to basically scan, color manage at the scan stage, so that when things went into the retouch stage, it was very quick because it was for a picture library. It was about volume rather than about excellence, even though the pictures had to be excellent that were coming out. It had to be a very quick process. So I was learning all of that, and that progressed fairly quickly, actually. And then I started to sit with photographers, and it was mostly editorial stuff that I started off with. But it was the test stuff. So Graham wasn't really trusting me with like his big clients just then. And then that progressed to working with his hard hitters, I think, and then sharing. So by the end of my time there, Graham had managed to get Tim Walker on the books, and we were sharing some of the imagery with Tim Walker, and that was just mind blowing. Just learning how a photographer like that looks at imagery and what they're actually looking for in the imagery, and really delicate light-handed shifts in color. Pardon me. Really delicate light-handed shifts in color, which were, to be with someone that could look at a picture and say, yeah, you need like 1-2% cyan in the shadow there, and make the contrast in that area, all in the same picture. So, which was going right the way back to when I was wet printing, where you'd get your test print out and you draw all over it, +1 here and grade 5 there, and hold back here and create a mask for that area, and really kind of print the picture. And that's the way it was dealing with Tim, was just printing this picture, and that was just brilliant experience. And then
also really unique set of skills. Sorry, I was going to say really unique set of skills to be able to translate your darkroom experience over onto the digital side of things. So you knew exactly what he was talking about.
Yeah. I think I was very fortunate because like, we discussed, I was at the early stages between film and digital, and having an understanding of the wet process, and the treatment of that. Back then it was like 3 rolls a shot, and on a roll, if you were shooting on an RZ, that's only 10 frames. That's 10-12 frames, whatever it was it? Anyway. So you really had to have a different mentality towards photography then. It was a much more kind of a much more thought out process, I think, at the time of pressing the button, all the way through to the print stage. Whereas now it's like, people are shooting, 100 frames per shot or 300 frames per shot, and then struggling whether they want the shot with a hand at this height or this height, and those kinds of decisions.
I guess you get your favourite ever 5 words that you hear, which is, "We'll fix that in post."
Oh. Are we on to the pet hate?
But that is true. I guess what you're saying is that there was when you're shooting on film, you couldn't afford to kind of rely on this. But also there's a difference in the sense that on shoots now, there's quite a lot of people involved in the creative decisions immediately. But in some kind of way, that's also made it harder for them to actually reach a decision at the time. So quite often you'll have a client that's kind of, on set, and they'll make a call, and then actually that call gets changed later down the line because somebody else who wasn't on the shoot has kind of got involved. And suddenly it's a case of, can we actually change this now back to what we had? And you might not have the pictures, and that's where it kind of, there's a bit of an over reliance on being able to just change anything after the fact. And obviously with skilled retouchers like yourself out there, you can do amazing kind of work with images, but it's I guess the difficulty is you can change something visually, but there's a certain energy that gets lost if something is too kind of manipulated after the fact without the forethought having gone into it, if you see what I mean. You lose some spontaneity, I find.
Oh, 100%. And I think that's one of the things that's happening now is this level of authenticity that you have to bring to a picture, no matter how hyper real you're trying to make a world for the final image. There needs to be some level of authenticity. You need to have some integrity in the original shot, so that when people are looking at that picture, the final image, they're not sitting there and thinking, well, you might as well have just drawn that or gotten a painter to do that or something, Yeah.
I mean, that's an interesting point. Do you think there obviously was a time in everyone's post production where it was just too much, and obviously that's now come all the way back to now everyone wanting authenticity, everyone wanting realism. I mean, obviously there's still groups of people on Instagram who love that like hyper real, unbelievably smooth skin that doesn't exist. But I think the real skill in retouching now is to make it look unretouched, but retouched. You know what I mean?
Yeah, to a certain degree, I say, yeah, to a certain degree. It depends. I suppose it ultimately depends on the kind of image that you're trying to create. And I think this is, one of the things where kind of skin retouching has been brought all the way back because social media is so saturated with filters that completely change the look of people. Where you're not even sure what's happening with the image that you're looking at. So yeah, having that kind of pardon me, having that integrity in the shot, like I said, the authenticity is really important. Did I just waffle for ages?
That being said, that's absolutely fine. That being said, I mean, what do you see as obviously that you've explained this kind of transition of the last 10 years, and as Tom said, there definitely was a period probably about 10 years ago when retouching and post-production in shots was getting to the point where it was like whole, it was very kind of popular in advertising. It wasn't so much that it was driven by demand, that there were these kind of big fantastical images, and then there's been a kind of more of a move back to something that feels a bit more real, and especially with the resurgence of people loving stuff that's shot on film, images that look like they haven't been lit but obviously have been lit, but kind of maintain that natural feel. These are all trends, but where do you, from a point of view of the technology and what have you, what do you see in the future for retouching? Because obviously now I've seen recently, people using gaming engines, for example, to create landscapes that, the mind can come up with anything, and literally drop somebody into a situation. You've got CGI, which is similar to that and is developing as well. And if you look at the movie industry, that series that was on Sky, which you would have, The Mandalorian, I bet you've seen that.
Oh yeah.
Have you seen that? Yeah. I knew you'd be a fan of that. That was all shot kind of almost in the round. Shot in a massive LED screen, so that they can not project, but they can have the landscape they're actually filming in there, rather than shooting on green screen, and then that affects the lighting. So with that being said, with those technologies kind of emerging, how do you see that kind of seeping into the stills world and into the photography world? What kind of elements of those do you think are going to be taking off over the next 10, 20, 30 years, do you think?
Well, I hope that kind of technology is brought into the studio, where you can create these environments and these worlds as normal or as mad as you want them to be in the studio. And I think that there's, the job of the retoucher, I think, it's just basically to take that raw image and just make it beautiful. So you don't necessarily have to do like a billion part comp in order to make something look beautiful. And relying on AI algorithms to make a picture beautiful, I think as brilliant as that is, it kind of takes the artistry out of it. Of course it does, because as an artist, you want to create beautiful things, right? Or things with a message. So I don't see there being a massive kind of decline in retouching. I think the kind of headspace of retouching being brought back into that kind of wet printing world is going to be more and more sought after, I think, because people will then, if you're not changing the actual structure of the image, you're changing or you're manipulating the shadows, the colors, the highlights, and you're then printing the image as you would have done in a darkroom, taking more care over the that one frame and making it the best as that frame. What was it that Ansel Adams said? The negative is the music score and the print is the orchestra playing the music or something. I'm badly paraphrasing Ansel Adams there, but
that's nice.
But yeah, so you take that neg essentially and then make it into this print, which is where the beauty is,
And so, I mean, for those of our listeners who maybe haven't worked that much with professional retouchers like yourself, then talk us through your kind of typical workflow. What would that look like on a job? Like, obviously, with certain photographers, I imagine you've built relationships up, and it's a lot more fluid. But generally, how does it start? Do you get approached at the beginning of a project, and what do you require from the photographer? What does that look like in terms of deliverables? Just talk us through your workflow. And also, I guess the listeners would be interested in how you actually, work on the images themselves. Do you have any particular kind of folder structures that you use or techniques that you have picked up that you think this is an absolute must? For example, with myself, I remember when I first learned you could retouch on a blank layer and let it affect the layer below rather than copying the whole layer and massively increasing your file size. That was like a total revelation for me at the time. And I remember thinking, oh God, why did no one tell me this before? So is there anything like that as well? So I just want to kind of to the total newbies out there that haven't worked with retouchers, just explain your process.
Well, I like to, when it comes to projects working with photographers, well, with any project really, I like to be involved way before anything is put into, before lights are set up or anything like that. Just so that we, some jobs can be really kind of intensive, even though you don't imagine them to be. Things like a lot of the specials for TV, for example, will, you're photographing talent on a background, but you get 10 minutes with that talent, for example. So you don't really have time to set up your set and all that kind of stuff. So you photograph your talent and then have to drop them into a colorama or something like that. So being involved at the beginning and understanding what the photographer is going to create for me to use and advising on that is really important. So I like to be involved at the beginning, but if I'm not, with the photographers that I work with, they already know that they should get blank plates, build up on the set lighting, because your lighting evolves throughout the day. So I like to get blank plates at the start and end of the day so that you can see where the lightings end up. Most of the time that's not something that I'm given. But yeah, that's essentially the main crux of it is working out what the assets are that you need. And then the pictures come in and if there are particular selects, then I'm waffling. I'm really sorry, guys.
No, you're good. Honestly, that makes sense.
This is exactly what our listeners need, though. Is it's almost kind of the comment about blank plates, for example, being at the beginning and the end. That's a great tip for most people out there. It's not something I would have personally thought about. It's only probably in the last. I shoot a lot of my stuff handheld, and I've had to really kind of, fight against myself to actually start shooting more jobs locked down on a tripod and shoot plates.
If you're shooting,
but I find it incredibly frustrating because it's difficult. Not the way I shoot.
But that's another thing that as a retoucher you have to adapt to, because some photographers don't want to use a tripod. What the hell does if you're shooting someone in action, why are you going to be stuck on a tripod when you want to be involved in that movement? So as a retoucher, you have to adapt to certain things. With the more stage stuff, you got to take care of perspective, camera height, focal length, all that kind of stuff has to be essentially the same. If you're doing like, if you've got like let me think. If you're doing a shot on a street, for example, and that you've only got limited time with this person, that person, then everything has to be essentially the same, because you're going to group these people together on this street. So you can't really run around with the camera, because someone's, you're looking up the nose on some person, looking on the shoulders of another, and that kind of stuff just won't gel in a picture.
Well, a classic example of this would be kind of the Vanity Fair kind of specials, where they'll have all of these celebs in, and you have multiple kind of people from shot in different countries suddenly all ending up as if they've been lounging around some Hollywood lot, and comped in, and that's when you end up with somebody with 3 legs and a mystery hand on their shoulder, which was quite a controversy I remember a few years ago.
Do you remember Photoshop disasters?
I also have to state at this point, I have to say at this point, for anyone who is listening who doesn't know what we meant by shooting plates, and most people probably will, but a plate is effectively like a blank background shot in a way, with the lighting set up that you can use for retouching if you need to cut stuff out or drop stuff in. But is there anything from the plates perspective? Give us a tip on what you look for in plates and what people might overlook when they're shooting a plate.
So if you're shooting something in a studio, generally where you've set the camera up is essentially what I'll end up using. It's not going to change too much. Things that are much more kind of involved are the ones where you need to have a background extension, and a lot of work nowadays is all about creating more space to be able to crop in and out of and get all these formats done. So you need a lot of height, you need a lot of ground, you need left and right, and I think some photographers think that if you just get the camera and point it left, point it right, that's enough, and that kind of stresses me out, because let me think. Okay, here's a brilliant example of someone nailing background extension photography and doing it properly. Jay Brooks, shooting for All Creatures Great and Small Series 2, did honestly, they were on set in some village wherever it was, and he's actually essentially photographed a 180 sky to the ground, up to the left, to the right. So I ended up having, in terms of background plates, about 250 plates to stitch this environment out of, and there was enough of an empty scene that when the requests came in to make the ground, make the bottom of the frame longer to incorporate text and logos and stuff like that, I could then build out without creating too many repeats. And he nailed that. And he wasn't using because normally I try and encourage photographers to buy a Nodal Ninja. Have you ever heard of those?
No,
So,
but I assume it's one that puts the pivoting point around the front element as opposed to the base of the camera.
yes. So when you're photographing
Right.
a scene and you're moving the camera around, you're not drastically changing the perspective as you're throwing the camera around
Sure.
to capture this scene. And it's also being clever about the way you're capturing these plates. If you know that sometimes just from one viewpoint is not enough. You have to pick up the camera, move a meter to the left, photograph, pick up the camera, move the meter so that you're then creating this long scene. Because some jobs need that. So it's being clever and talking to your retoucher. As a photographer, you need to talk to your retoucher about this, because they, as a retoucher, I know that clients want to have X, Y, and Z, and if they suddenly demand it halfway through a job, you need those assets, and I call those are called assets rather than photography, because they're just bits to make the photography. Does that make sense? So
Yeah, of course.
Because it's also being respectful with the language of how you talk about photography, and defining what's an asset that's just used and what isn't.
Right.
How's out of interest, obviously with software these days, there's been a lot said for Capture One. Probably the less said the better in terms of how it's developing. But one of the features they brought on recently was a panoramic stitch, and in terms of getting a rough, being able to help with shooting plates for maybe a photographer who's doing their own retouching. Do you think that kind of software development is useful?
Yeah. I haven't used the one in Capture One. I didn't realize that they'd introduced that, and Capture One is a tough.
I think there are limitations to it, though. I think there's only a couple of. I think you can only use a certain amount of images, whereas obviously in the Photoshop version, which I assume is the one you use, it can do as much as your computer can process, right?
Yeah, I use a combination of Photoshop and ones that are used.
MS Paint. Sorry.
R.I.P. And one stitch.
I use PT GUI. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I use
PT GUI. That sounds like somebody I went to school with. What's PT GUI?
You went to a very posh school.
I think that's used for more like if you're creating something for to be in a headset. So using photography to create scenes for a headset, and it's kind of
that
like
must be VR.
Yeah. I think it's used primarily for VR stuff. Yeah, but it's really good. Obviously,
I mean, to go back to what we were talking about earlier about the future of where it's going in retouching, and VR is obviously another sphere that I personally hadn't considered, because you hear a lot about it for video, but you don't hear it so much about kind of stills in that world. But I guess with the convergence of everything, that is something that's going to be important to. Yeah, you've got to shoot loads of plates for that.
Yeah, well, VR is it's a different discipline. I've retouched for VR, and it feels like a different discipline, because as you're retouching, there's VR and then there's stereoscopic retouching. So there are two different worlds. So VR, you can put your headset on and look around a scene and be like, wow, I'm inside the sphere of this world, isn't it great? And then there's stereoscopic stuff, which is like, wow, look how far out I can see, and move around, and there's parallax and all that kind of stuff. So that's a different world of retouching. That it's quite a brain numbing kind of like. How do you work out what you're doing is then stereoscopic and doing it that way? That was that's tough retouching. Yeah, I did.
So to go back to your kind of, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say I did a project for a VR Oculus when they were relaunching Oculus or bringing out the Oculus 2. Their flagship show was the David Attenborough Micro Monsters, which was that's the one that got me into lasers really. But when I had to create part of the opening sequence, the opening titles, I had to create a parallax of these insects, moving in slow motion, and that was really, really difficult. Really difficult. I had to have a shaft of light, and if you don't get that right in the retouch when you're creating it, it becomes this weird thing, and you have to constantly like in and out of the Oculus to check your work. That was really tough. Really tough. Yeah.
So in terms of say we're kind of, you're doing a standard photo, having talked about all these kind of futuristic things that you're now having to work on and move your skills into, but to go back to, say, I don't know, an editorial feature, what would be your workflow? So you've got your kind of assets from the photographer, and I'm not talking about an overly complicated retouch, but how do you tend to work? Is there like folder structures you use? Is there techniques that you always go to as your base kind of technique for working? Do you rename the files in a certain way? Is there anything like that somebody who's new to retouching or not that experienced in retouching might benefit from?
Yeah, well, the first thing I always do is duplicate the original layer. So in your layer stack, you've always have the original, always, and leave that locked or put that in a folder that's called, original or whatever. You just never touch that once you've opened it up. Then you just normally I duplicate out. I do the initial clean, and in terms of, I like to separate out things like background and skin, because they're the ones that people mostly get concerned about, is skin tones, skin retouch, and background, and how a subject is popping away moves away from, or is popped away from the background to make the subject stand out. So I like to isolate the subject away from the background and have it in a kind of obvious way in your layer stack. So the thing in the most foreground of your shot is at the top of the stack, and the thing furthest away is at the bottom of your stack. So you're, as you're reading the picture, I dealt with an art director once years ago where they were describing something always underneath the subject, and I couldn't. So I'm working underneath the thing that I was retouching. I can't even remember what it was, but then I realized what he was actually saying was behind. So understanding the depth of your canvas in your layer stack, so that you're not confusing underneath with behind, and above with in front, that kind of stuff. Naming accordingly, make sure that you're, that one of the main tips is selection. When you're selecting your layers, sometimes you're hunting for that particular layer that's doing that thing. So if you're doing a lot of work on skin, for example, everything that you do with skin goes in that folder, so that you're not like, as we know, in a job, you do a picture, and halfway through the job, someone has more comments on that thing that you know, like the skin, for example. But 3 rounds in, they're like, "Oh, can you sort out the skin color, make it a bit whatever to go in this scene?" And then a lot of people that a lot of the juniors that I used to work with would slap that over the top of the layer stack, which made it very difficult to work out what was happening where and what's splitting, because the more curves you use, or the more adjustment layers you use, the more you're going to split a picture apart. You know, you're going to create these flaws in the shadows and in the blacks, you know, where it kind of JPEGs out, and you get like green next to a magenta or a cyan or something, and it's, where does that happen? How do you control that? So yeah, be clear about your layer stack and what that's specifically for. Yeah.
That's great. Okay, so let's go back onto the stages. So, you know, obviously we're talking about beautifully kept files in a beautifully organized stack with things separated out. Every layer's named. You mentioned, though, you did an initial clean. What gets done in the initial clean? Like obvious things like Starbucks cups, Game of Thrones, if you're watching.
Yeah. The initial clean is like, you know, like you get dust on a sensor, that kind of stuff. You know, if it's unavoidable, sometimes cables and flash packs are in shot, which that's another pet hate. If you can move that, move it.
Yep.
So that kind of stuff gets cleaned up. If it's a shot on a street somewhere, cigarette butts, that kind of, you know, just like a general clean of the image outside of the things that are specifically requested. So if someone's very much into the kind of creases on a garment, that comes at a later stage. So the initial thing is just to make sure, it's like dusting your neg when you're going into the wet printing process. You dust off your neg, you clean your lens, you make sure you've got a nice surface to work on, and then you start the printing process. It's that mentality.
Right, that makes sense. So then obviously then you go into the main part of the edit, right? Now for your stacks, so I have, for all my Photoshop work, I have a TIFF file which is about 40 pixels by 40 pixels. So the file size is really small, but it's already preloaded with all of my layers, folders, everything's already beautifully named, all the layers are colored. And then I just literally just bring that into every document that I work on. So I know everything's going to be in the exact same spot. Do you do something like that, or is every job different?
Every job is different. It's very difficult for, I mean, some of the things that are identical. So the overall mood and grade that I apply to whatever the picture or the deliverables are will always sit at the top of the layer stack. So they're affecting everything underneath. And then I can tell what is being split or not split. So some things are identical, but I don't have you know, like a specific way of creating a folder stack that is, you know, I can't lift and I don't do that. No. long
no, fair. I think it's different for you. Obviously you're working with a lot of different photographers, whereas I'm only working on my own work. So my own work tends to be quite similar. So that I guess makes more sense for me. With the files that you get from the photographer, going almost right back to the beginning, are these the raw files? Are they bundled as an EIP, or are they? Sorry, not in EIP. What's the Capture One format where they bundle the settings with the raw file? Is it EIP? Yeah, fine. Yeah. So is it EIPs? Is it TIFFs with a look already across it, or is it flat processed out TIFFs? How do you normally get them? And again, I'm sure every job's different and every photographer's different.
Mm-hmm.
And if that is the case, do you have a preference? I assume the RAWs.
Yeah, always. I think RAWs are always my standard request. Is just give me the RAW. If there are specific kind of settings that a photographer wants to keep, because that's their style of photography, then I try not to manipulate that too much when it's in the RAW stage.
Sure.
And that's when it comes in bundled as an EIP or an XMP. Some people are still using Lightroom, which is nice. Well, I don't know. Is it nice?
Is it nice? I don't know. To be honest, we all might have to use Lightroom in a few years, depending on how Capture One goes. It seems to be like
Capture One. It's just
what is
the
going on
problem with Capture One.
What is going on?
Why are they?
They'll merge. It'll be Capture Lightroom.
They might buy it out, but I don't understand Capture One. Why are there so many different? Why are there so many different versions? And if you open up a previous version in the newer version, you can't go back to the previous version. So you're forcing photographers to always buy a new. It's just insane.
I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, there you go. But also, Capture One is now Capture One 21, 22. So instead of doing versions, because if you go on the Capture One 21 or wherever, it's not actually. I think it's version 14. So they've changed it to become a yearly thing. So now Capture One
from 12 to 20, didn't it? Or something?
Yeah, and so now Capture One 22 is the 2022 version of Capture One. And
how much different is it?
It's part of their. No, not massively. There are various parts of it that are tweaked, but the trouble is they're trying to. I think rather than they're moving maybe away from their kind of core demographic that has made the software what it is, and are trying to open up the software a little bit and maybe make it easier towards people who are maybe transitioning from Lightroom. Trouble is, that kind of irritates people like us, right? Like for me, I need a super reliable bit of software that just works. And they've done little things in the past. I mean, I'll obviously talk about the export tab that they've just removed one version without telling anyone. That was good.
That was frustrating.
There's little things. Oh my God. I mean, here's the thing. Speak to the people who use your software every minute of every day and ask them if you think that's a good idea. I can guarantee they'll be like, no, we need that. That is actually a fairly that's a cornerstone of my workflow. Please don't get rid of it. But then they brought it back because, without being funny, we all kicked off. Everyone I know absolutely, just lost it with them. And they basically had to backpedal pretty quickly. And then it was put back in the next version. But there's just little things that they do. For example, a few versions ago and in the past, they had a edit in Photoshop shortcut on the right click, which you could then program to a Stream Deck. So with one button, I could then open that image in Photoshop. So if I was, I work in Photoshop for all my luminosity, and then I bring it back into Capture for my color, right? So I'm quite often flipping between the two. And then just one version, they just got rid of it. And now you have to right click, go down to open with, and then go across, but you have to wait for their menu system to load. And it's just like, it's such an easy win for them to change. Anyway, rant over. I'm very cross with it. Rant accepted. Yeah, thank you. I'm sure there are people listening going, do you know what? I remember that was a shortcut. I can't believe they got rid of it. But Capture One, if anyone in Denmark is listening, please stop ruining the software that you've made our lives so dependent on. Honestly, it's making life miserable. Please stop it.
As a retoucher as well, I work with photographers with a range of budgets. Their business budgets are totally different. I'm working with photographers that are new to the scene and photographers that have been well established for decades, and those photographers, they can afford to have the newest version of Capture One whenever they go on set and all that kind of jazz. The newer photographers, they'll buy one version of Capture One, and that's it. That's what they work with. So I then have to have an array of Capture Ones on clogging up my hard drive, because I've got photographers working with earlier versions, and if they give me a hard drive and I change it to a newer version of Capture One and then hand that hard drive back, they can't access their own work. I mean, the insanity of that.
See, that's funny. That you don't even think about that. As someone who just works on his own in the office, I'd never thought about that. But yeah, that must be incredibly frustrating.
Yeah.
Because then that also means, I assume, do you then have to then make sure you have the latest version just to make sure you keep up with any photographers that come in?
Yeah. So I always have the latest version, but I have to have older versions because I've got photographers that are using older versions. And if they've handed a hard drive, I can't hand them back something they can't then, it's their work. I can't affect their work to such a extent that they can't archive it, It's insane.
Well, that would be effectively you locking them out of the session. Which I don't think is really what you want to be doing.
No. How unprofessional. Like, you're not allowed your photos back.
Yeah, imagine. My day rate's got a bit confusing because I now own your images.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like
that's quite an interesting point, though. So you're obviously working on a session and then handing them back the session that they. So are you working on the raw files within the session as well, or kind of opening them as TIFFs and then saving them back into a session rather than delivering kind of just final PSDs or final TIFFs?
Well, it totally depends on how the photographer hands over files. Sometimes they hand over the session that they shot on the day, and I work through that session. Normally, and there's always a level of paranoia. Most retouchers should have a level of paranoia that's healthy, in that you don't want to ruin the original thing that's been handed to you. So I'm always cloning variants of the pictures as I'm processing out, because I don't want to really affect, because there might be a setting, window that I don't have open in my session, in the way that I've got my, the UI set up. There might be a setting that I don't know has been touched by the photographer. So that's why I always clone a variant in Capture One. And then
have you got any kind of systems for how you keep on top of what you've worked on and what's been given back? Do you use kind of color coding on folders, or do you use naming conventions? Because that's the thing of kind of, if you've got multiple projects on the go, something that myself and Tom have talked a lot about on the show before is kind of the organizational side of the photography world and the photography business, and how we keep on top of certain aspects of our business. How do you do that as a retoucher? Do you have any systems in place that you've developed over the years that work well for you?
Yeah. So each job is numbered. So when a project comes in, I assign it a project number, and on the job folder, the main hero job folder, I name it. So it's got the number, the client, then the photographer. So I always know what the job number, the job name, the client, then the photographer. So when I'm looking in my, because I always stack my folders in my Finder on the left, so I know which ones are the live jobs that I'm working on. And then I can see all the pertinent information is there, and I can always cross-reference that against my estimates and budgets and all that kind of stuff. Within that folder, then I separate out the brief, what the client supplied, the work folder, and most importantly, what I have sent, and I date those folders. So I've got a sent folder, and I date those folders. so that I know that if a client's lost something, you sent something, a couple of weeks ago, what was it? And then I can look and I can say what day I sent something on, and that corresponds with emails as well, so that I know that I separate my emails out into two very distinct threads when I'm dealing with a job. A whips thread, so that I know that any kind of creative talk, any kind of evolution of the project is in the whips thread. And then I have a finals thread, so that when a job is signed off and I've handed stuff back to the client, I know that I can search that job name, whips, and the thread comes up. Job name, finals, and I know when things have been delivered and finished. So I always make sure that there's a traceable kind of system that I can find when a particular thing. That's the most important thing, because essentially I do the work, but if it's not gone to the right place at the right time, I've failed at my job, because that's the big part, is handing it back or handing it over to the client. Yeah. And if I can't do that, there's no point.
No,
So keep on top of the dated sent folders.
So
in terms of, sorry, I was going to say, jump in on that. Like, in terms of kind of things then that you would point out, do you have any pet hates that you get from photographers? Let's go back to the rants for a minute. Because because obviously by going through this, we'll be giving photographers tips. Like, don't do this. It's annoying.
Yeah.
And it makes your retoucher's life hell.
Yeah.
What would they be?
The big thing is sync your camera so that the shutter's going off correctly. Don't make me try and save a shot that's got half a shutter coming through it.
I mean, that's a fairly basic thing that you would hope.
But sometimes,
frame,
yeah, let's use the whole pixel range there. But sometimes photographers will hand over the whole shoot back to the client without doing an actual edit. Like, if you're going to delete pictures, delete them from. There was a trick that we used to do when we were shooting film. So you'd do the shots. You'd be doing this catalog shoot, and you're doing however many rolls per shot, and then the photographer would do their edit and keep their edit really neatly placed within a folder that's very clear. And at the back of the folder, all the other strips they would cut up. So that here's everything. You asked for everything, but here's everything in a really unorganized way. So if you want to go through it, But here's the stuff that's right, and go through that one. If you've got the effort to do that, and that's the one of the things I think is, as a photographer, if you've got shots that don't work, literally they do not work, get rid of them. Because one client will show their 5-year-old daughter, do you think this is nice? And they'll say, yeah, use that one. And then I have to spend 8 hours trying to get rid of, I don't know, someone's thumb, taking up 50% of the screen.
5-year-olds, man. They're terrible art directors.
Honestly, I did a job for a pharmaceutical client. And there are so many stakeholders, they call them, so many people involved. And, everyone's trying to justify their position at that table with having creative comments and a lot of these people aren't creatively minded. And I think that there was someone who was high up in the pecking order that was showing their child daughter to have a look at the pictures. And those comments were then filtering back, and I'm like, "Why are you doing this?" But you can't turn around and say, "Client, you're wrong."
No, of course, yeah, right.
Wow. Yeah, that's another pet hate. Don't let your 5-year-olds.
did we discuss this on the pod before, Tom? I seem to have a vague recollection of Disney and hairy arms.
No, so I had a Disney and hairy arms.
Yeah, like Snow White and her hairy arms.
What?
What? Whose hair and hair?
So,
ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens when there's a stroke happening on air.
No, so it was a thing back in the day when they used to make the Disney kind of animators apparently would leave in kind of something quite obvious, which was something like Snow White would have hairy arms.
Yes, we did.
It would be. Yes, I'm not mental.
No, I remember this. Right, and it's like it's a false flag, so they focus on that rather than the.
Yes,
right.
You give them something to actually spot that you're always planning to take out.
Who
was it happened to be Snow White's beard?
I can't remember who told us that, but that was a. If anyone wants to go through the last 30 episodes and let us know, that would be great. But yeah, no, I do remember vaguely having that. It's just the way you brought it up.
Sorry, yeah, where my mind works. But there's a term that came off the back of that. Basically, it's an actual. Because this was, animators in the. I guess it was Snow White was late 50s, 60s, was it? So you've got people who are, all the way back then, kind of having to put something in because the execs are going to have something that they want to say, some creative input. Understandably, if you give somebody a choice, you're kind of like making them think they have to have an opinion rather than being like, know what, that's good. You're putting them into a corner where they're going to go, oh yeah, I've got to find something at fault here.
I do actually. I have just quickly Googled it and I have found the name for the term.
Okay.
It's called the hairy arms. So turns out a very well known thing. So I do apologise.
Oh my word, this is something I'm going to have to use.
Well remembered.
Yeah. So what other pet hates do you have? There must be a few.
Yeah, people that don't clean their sets before they start shooting. I mean, if you know that you're shooting in that direction and you've got your location van, you've got your snacks table set up, move them. Don't photograph things that you
crafty.
know are going.
Get crafty out of the way.
There was a photographer that I was doing some stuff for years and years and years ago, and he sacked an assistant for that because he said to the assistant, "Can you move all the kit because I'm going to be shooting this direction?" And the assistant was like, "You take it out in Photoshop." And after that, he never called them again because, there are certain things that why do you want to pay?
Well, that's basically taking the job that they've been given and saying, "No, someone else will do that. I can't bother to do it right now." That's ridiculous.
If you can spend 5 minutes on set doing
30
something,
seconds.
Yeah,
exactly.
If you're doing something on set that takes you next to no time, but then will tag 2 hours in the retouch that you have to pay for, that's like, don't be insane. Just do your job.
There's also an element of it's seen as a bit of a magic wand, isn't it? Kind of like, oh well, we can change that in post, and sometimes there'll be somebody on set that will say that who's not. You're like, yeah, but wait, hang on a minute, you're not the one doing the post. And I feel like you've heard that somewhere that's an easy change, but actually it affects X, Y, Z that you might not be aware of.
Exactly.
And I've occasionally have had that where someone's jumped in and they've gone, oh no, don't worry, we'll sort that out in post. And I'm like, whoa, hang on. It's not your position to say that. Like, let's actually discuss this first. And if we can change it now, let's change it now. I much prefer to get stuff right in camera than to have to fanny around later with something that is just never going to be quite as good as you said, that 30 seconds of extra effort or that 5 minutes of extra effort to get it right in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's also harking right back to that authenticity. If for example, if you've got let's say you're shooting something and it's got a lot of haze, you're using a lot of fog on your set to create atmosphere, and then you've got light stands in your shot And then you can then remove those lights that if they need to be out and you've got a hazy set, remove the light stands, and have an empty plate, so that when you have to remove them in post, you're not muddying the haze that you've created. There are techniques of cleaning your set which don't take very long, that actually become very difficult in post, to be able to maintain like that beauty of something that you're creating. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but that brings me on to an interesting point, actually, because I did a shoot recently, and I was having to shoot plates of haze that I wanted to, in case we needed to extend the background. And I've heard a lot recently of photographers starting to use, it makes me feel like we've gone back to the 80s a bit, but starting to use things like Pro Mist filters rather than just for filming. They'll start to use them on stills things to kind of add, a certain je ne sais quoi to the picture. But how do you feel about, okay, so first question, how do you feel about filters being used on camera that are going to affect the image quality versus replicating them in post? Because that's an interesting debate in itself. Some people say it's very difficult to actually replicate the look of something like a Pro Mist in post. And number two, do you have any tips on things like shooting haze and atmosphere as plates? Is there something people should bear in mind? Like, is shooting it on a certain color background rather than shooting it on white or shooting it on black? Or is there a certain way to shoot stuff like that actually makes it easier in post?
Well, it's funny that you should say shooting on a particular color background, because a lot of photographers think that shooting something on a green background is actually beneficial for the shoot that you're doing. Knowing that something is going to be comped. So green screen is a film technique. Sorry, I'm going off the haze onto green screen rant. Green screen is for film, and they use specific software to remove the green screen in order to composite whatever they're doing in the film. And because you're using 24 frames a second, the level of cutout doesn't necessarily have to be as particular. And also the software that they use also remove the green from skin tones, so people don't look so sallow. For the most part, that's you can see budget films where people have got like green fringing and stuff like that. So photographers that shoot on green screen are making a huge error in the amount of time that's added in post afterwards. So I always recommend like a grey for people that that you're going to comp out, because that way you're focusing on the lighting and there's no color bounce, there's no white back. Don't shoot on white, because you're going to get white bounce and white fringing, which is a nightmare to get rid of. But then that goes back to being involved in the pre-production conversations. When shooting haze, I would say shoot in a black background, black studio, and so that haze, when it's applied to photography in Photoshop, you're using your blend modes in order to bring that haze through. If it's photographic haze that you're using, because you can create haze in Photoshop, but if you're using photographic haze, then shoot on a solid black, so that when you bring that into Photoshop, you're actually, through your blend modes, just using the haze itself. You knock out the black using screen or whatever technique you're using for that.
So it's a bit like shooting flare. Sometimes if you want to put an artificial flare, it's similar. You'd want to shoot it on black so that you can use screen mode.
Yeah. There are other blend modes that you can use as well, like hard mix sometimes is nice, or pin light, or flick through your blend modes and see what works best for that particular application.
And how about filters then?
The filters, if you're photographing something and you want to use your filter as part of the photography, then use it. Don't hold yourself back. If it's something that that's going to be a heavy comp, So let's say if you're shooting something for editorial, you're going to use your filters as you like, because editorial tends to be, you take your picture, you just do some color work to it, bit of a cleanup, and then it goes into the magazine or whatever, and that's a really lovely workflow. With the advertising, I think if you know that you're going to do several people as a comp and you want to use, I don't know, some old school Koken filter that makes it look like you're looking through bug's eyes, but you want to comp 15 people into a scene, don't use your filter. But then I still recommend that you shoot reference plates, so that when it comes into post, there are things that a good retoucher will spot that will then manipulate into the scene to create that reality. One of the things that I always told my assistants, so I've had a couple of assistants in the past, and the main thing I would say to them is not so much does the picture that I'm working on look real, but to ask the question, why doesn't it look real? And really work out why it doesn't look real. Is it the shadows? Is it the aberrations? Is it the perspective? Is it, all those kinds of things? Have you got a difference in black point? Some pictures you'll look at and you'll think, yeah, it's good, but there's something weird, and it might be that the black point on the background is, like 2 points off, or is green, and the black point on the subject is blue or something, So it's working out things like that. Why isn't it real? And spend time on that thought,
Here's another quick geeky question then, out of interest. How often do you calibrate your monitor, and what steps do you take to kind of mitigate any issues with color calibration? Do you have any recommended monitors that you use, any recommended calibration tools that you use, and any kind of tips or techniques that would make things a bit easier for people?
Well, I'll just show you exactly what I've got kicking off here.
Display.
The i1.
i1.
Yeah, I've got that kicking off.
i1 Display Pro.
I'm glad to see that, because that's what I've got too.
Mine's in the drawer.
I like the UI. Yeah, I like the way that
monitor
operates.
Wise.
So
yeah, it's pretty straightforward, isn't it?
Yeah, there is a bit of a delay, isn't there? So monitor wise, my main hero monitor is my iMac Pro, and luckily nowadays there used to be, back in the day, there used to be big differences between this monitor and that monitor, and this make and that make, and you really had to be on top of your calibration, because the color would slip, which I never understood how, because it's maths, right? Color is maths when you're dealing with computers. So how does the maths go? But anyway,
well, it would be a degradation. It would be a degradation of the panel, right?
Well, yes, I suppose, but how does it? Anyway, I don't know how colors back in the day used to slip hugely. So you'd start off with I don't know, whatever kind of white point, luminescence or whatever, and then a month later it's like completely and utterly like somewhere else. Anyway, but nowadays you don't have that kind of huge changes. So I calibrate my screen anytime I move my screen. I calibrate it. So when I was moving from the bedroom when we were working from home at the beginning of COVID, and when we finally got the office sorted upstairs, I calibrated the screen then. And that was, when did I move up? So that was about 2 months ago. And I think maybe calibrating or having a look at the calibration every 3 months, every quarter, is probably a good thing to look at. But I think with the integrity of screens now, you don't really have to look at it that often as you used to do. There's stability now. But with like my NEC, so I've got two screens. My tools are on my right hand side. So I've got an NEC, an old NEC that's like 12, 13 years old. And because I know that the color changes often on that, I never use that for anything to do with color. So that's always going to be my tool screen. Anything to do with color, I bring back into my iMac Pro screen, so because I know that that's stable.
Sure. Makes sense. I did have an iMac Pro. Actually, Greg, you bit of a sore subject, I know, but you also had an iMac Pro, didn't you?
I still do. It's just sat in the studio not being used because of some kernel panic, who sounds like Colonel Sanders, but he's not. He's more annoying. And I can't work out whether or not it's worth trying to take it somewhere and get it fixed. It's definitely a hardware issue.
Yeah, definitely get it fixed.
But where is good to get that stuff done these days? Just Mac itself, I guess.
I suppose so. They're
Apple, take it to Apple.
You could go to the like Jigsaw. Maybe will have a team, and you're
That's
warranted.
Who I bought it off.
Oh, really? Well, have you spoken to them?
Yeah, a few years ago. But I think it's a hard. I haven't. I do need to. I kind of feel like they're going to be like, yeah, you bought it about 4 years ago. Piss off.
If you can get it fixed, I mean, it
was actually refurbed.
Oh.
It was refurbed, and it's what happens is you put I think it's something to do with USB and all the alignment. Sorry, this is totally off topic, but one of our listeners might know.
There we go.
I'm going into it. So all the ports at the back seem slightly misaligned. So, for example, the SD card slot stopped working, and the headphone port was kind of always a bit kind of fiddly, which makes me think they're all slightly out of whack. And what it is that one of the USBs or the Thunderbolts that goes into the back of it is causing that kernel panic because they're slightly knocked inside or something. I don't know. But that's my basic monkey brain, trying to hit it with a rock and figure out what's gone wrong with it.
Well, it sounds like a sensible thinking process behind that. But if you can get it fixed, get it fixed. I mean, it's a piece of kit, isn't it? And if you can't get it fixed,
yeah.
This is another thing that I always say is like, if you have a piece of kit, don't love it. It's just a piece of kit. If it breaks,
it's just a tool.
It's exactly. This isn't a child. Do you know what I mean? If it can get fixed, fix it. If it's broken, bin it.
Yeah, I always had a very many years ago. I interviewed Stanley Green, who was a fantastic photojournalist who sadly passed away not too long ago. Actually, he'd photographed conflicts around the world. He's got an amazing book called Black Passport about his time in Chechnya. And when he was very much younger, he'd worked in the studios of Eugene Smith, who, again, was a very talented photographer, but slightly tortured. There's actually a Johnny Depp film that's just come out about him in Japan. Mimota, I believe it's called. Mm-hmm. But when he was famous kind of magnum photographer, had photographed throughout World War II, suffered probably some degree of post-traumatic stress, was very addicted to amphetamines. And one day Stanley came into the studio as a young lad, and Gene would have these kind of days where he would literally spend days downing various pills, big taker of speed, I believe, at the time, and all sorts of amphetamines. So he'd spend days awake printing and working in the darkroom and drinking. And Stanley came in one day with his brand new SLR that his parents, I believe, had saved up and bought him as a present. I mean, I might be butchering the story, but effectively, he had this new camera, and Gene said, "What's that, Stanley? Show me." And he kind of gave him the camera, and he took it, and he hammered a nail into a piece of wood with this SLR, tossed it back to him, and said, "Remember, Stanley, the camera's just a tool."
Give him a chance to use it, mate.
That might be an apocryphal tale, but I like to think that's true.
I love that.
It's a great synopsis of we do get too attached to kit.
Yeah.
Well, and at the end of the day,
I have
just a tool.
I have a similar story. So this So this is my Leica Q2, and that, I don't know if you can see, is where I was opening bottles with it on a shoot. I was opening beer bottles with it, and everyone, it's a $4.5 grand Leica or whatever, and everyone could not believe I was doing it. And then I dropped it and kicked it across the floor to make a point. And then about a month after that, I accidentally dropped it in a lake. So look after your kit a little bit better than I do. No, sadly, it's a brick. So it's full on dead, but I've kept it mainly to tell stories of how I've now got a Leica bottle opener permanently.
What else can you bludgeon with that? Come on, think creatively.
Oh, I mean, all sorts. It is a heavy bit of kit. So it's actually it's my hammer. So it works quite well. Listen, V, I think we're going to start wrapping this up now, but before we get onto our usual bit that we do with everyone, I would love to chat to you about bits of kit that I think people can buy that maybe make life a little bit easier, maybe as a retoucher. Obviously, I think things like this might be one of my weirdest purchases ever. For anyone who can't see this on the screen, it's odd, isn't it? But it's kind of like, it's a very, very odd thing. But
because your camera's quite dark, it looks like you've only got 2 fingers and a thumb. But it's actually because your pinky and the index finger have gone ninja.
Yeah, right. If I pull,
and are covered in like a tight black neoprene, or was it not? It's not neoprene, is it? What is it? Like a
no, it is neoprene. Yeah, it's kind of like it's just like a
spandex. That's a better way. Yeah,
it's basically Spanx.
Tom is now wearing a spandex glove.
I'm wearing Spanx, but on my hand.
Do you retouch in a leotard?
I am currently in my retouch outfit. Business up top.
You look like you're in a
retouch at the bottom.
Backing dancer for Madonna in the 80s.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I hadn't brought it up, but it has helped me, and in a way, and I think
that's not even your retouching hand.
No, I'm left-handed. I'm not. I'm right-handed. But there are little bits. Obviously, I bought a Wacom years ago, and that kind of changed a lot. I assume you're going to say get a tablet, but is there little bits of kit that? What tips can we give to people? Obviously, control the lighting in your office so it's always as the same as possible.
Also for shooting, because the Nodal Ninja 6 was a good shout.
Yeah.
We'll link to that in the show notes.
Yeah.
But yeah, anything else that they can take from when they're actually capturing the pictures to editing them that would make their lives easier, do you think?
No, I think that's I mean, you don't need much.
Decent tripod.
Yeah, you don't need much for retouching. You need a computer and a tablet, and spandex. But other than that, you don't really need anything specific.
Oh no! Does this mean I'm going to have to leave that bit about my spandex glove in? I thought you'd be like, right, guys, here's a list of 25 things, and we'd have to cut that down. Now my hand is now going to be in the show. Damn.
I recommend a retouch blanket if you want to feel like that there's some sharing. I have a retouch blanket to keep my knees toasty.
Fully endorse a retouch poncho. Mainly because my studio is so cold that I have to have that and fingerless gloves. I edit in a Dickensian world.
So I'm not the only one who wears fingerless gloves. Good. All right.
Mine are like something out of Oliver, though. So.
I mean, if we're thinking about kit, the Nodal Ninja, as brilliant as that is, you don't have to buy one when you're photographing for stitching. You just have to be clever about the way you stitch. The Nodal Ninja just makes the end stitch really easy, and it depends on how much time you want to spend doing this versus that. That's it's the right piece of kit for the right reason. Don't buy something if you're editorial and you're shooting mostly in studios when you're never going to need to use that 300-400 pound piece of kit.
Of course. Makes sense. So, I mean, that's been a fascinating chat. If I'm honest,
Yeah, there's lots in there.
A ton.
I'm
Can I?
learned a lot
paranoid
about
of
your-
waffle.
Oh no! I mean,
Oh,
to be
no.
fair, I'm paranoid of waffles as well, but I quite like them with chicken and maple syrup. So wouldn't
Combo.
worry. We always ask our wonderful guests. They unfortunately they come on the show. We strand them on a desert island, but don't worry. There's electricity. There's a lab. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff going on. Really, to be honest, it's starting to sound like quite a good party island for photographers and
Yeah.
obviously people like yourself. Now, obviously, your background in photography, I'm sure you have a desert island camera.
Yeah. I mean, I've got like a couple of on my stand there. I've got like the Polaroid Land and Holger, which are great little play cameras. But I think a tank like the Pentax K1000, just a camera that does basic thing. It's got a hole at the
Hammer
front.
nails.
Yeah, it's got a hole at the front, film at the back, you're done. That is essentially, if this desert island has a lab, that is the camera with a 50mm lens. What more do you want?
Perfect. Well, that's it.
Yeah.
Quite. This island has unlimited film and unlimited lab costs just built into. I don't know what the currency is, but it's basically free.
Free.
Coconuts.
I like it.
Coconuts.
Because if it was
There we go.
totally free, then yeah, I would also add a Polaroid Land to that, and for Polaroid transfers. I was just getting into Polaroid transfers, and everyone started going digital, and I couldn't nick the Polaroids offset anymore. It's very, very angry.
Oh,
about
damn. Nice. And then also there is our desert island or your desert island photography book.
yeah, I was thinking about this last night, and I think it would have to be Robert Frank's The Americans, because
Good choice.
It's a solid choice, that. I don't think you're the first guest to suggest that, actually.
Really?
I think when we did our own one, I might have suggested it because I have the extended version that's got kind of all of the contact sheets and writings and all sorts in there.
Oh
brag.
man,
It
did you
came
go
out
to
a
his
few years ago,
exhibition
but yeah.
at the Serpentine? There was an exhibition at the Serpentine years ago with his work. Absolutely, just
I'm not sure I did. I think it was in collaboration with the exhibition they were having at the ICP,
all right.
which was later was probably about 10 or 12 years ago.
The Insane Clown Posse.
Yeah, a big Robert Frank fan.
That's an odd venue and an odd crew to go to that.
Fun though.
They're American though, right?
They are.
So,
That's
yeah.
true. That's true.
But that book is.
That's a great book.
Yeah. There's actually a picture. So I've got a smaller version because I was trying to find, because we've still got stuff in storage. I was trying to find the Americans, but there is a picture. This is the picture that actually made me want to be a photographer. Hang on. And it's not actually from the Americans. It's actually from London and Wales, which is a weird book title where you have London, but then all of Wales. But this one from Robert Frank's Book of London, Wales. Can you see that? Of a man in a bowler hat walking down the street.
Yes, in a London bus, kind of in the fog.
Yeah. From the 1950s. That's
beautiful.
beautiful. 51, London. That is the picture that made me want to be a photographer.
If you like that, you should check out Sergio Leran's book that came out a few years ago. It's a mix of work of his from, I believe, Bolivia and Chile, but also there was a period of his life when he was in London. It was around the same time as Robert Frank. And there's some amazing street photography in there of London, like old London, that
Sergio,
really echoes that image.
I think street photography,
nice.
That is the bravest photography, I think, because there's brave photography of going, into a war zone and photographing that and telling that narrative, which takes a certain level of braveness. But I think street photography, because it's a day-to-day thing, the level of bravery to be able to pick the camera up and photograph these scenes around you and interacting with these with the people around you, but not interacting at the same time. It's phenomenal. Street photography is beautiful. Very brave photography, I think.
See,
I think it's one of the toughest genres of photography to do well.
Yeah.
See, but I would argue, devil's advocate here, I would argue that that's less bravery and more confidence.
Well,
because I mean, in street photography, you're not going to lose your life.
No, I don't mean brave.
Semantics, Tom.
In that,
semantics.
Yeah, I don't mean brave in terms of like life-threatening situations.
It's a different level of brave, isn't it?
It's an internal braveness of you know, being able to you know, it's difficult to explain because I've not actually had to have
every day you go out, you're facing potential. Yeah, but every day you go out, you're facing potential failure. It's like you are going to get far less hits and far more misses. Than you are going to get hits.
Yeah.
And it takes a certain type of person to pick their camera up and go out day after day, knowing that that's the case, and knowing that they are not going to be defeated mentally by the idea of going out and trying to find a picture. Because unlike editorial or portrait or still life or anything really, where you're actually creating the image, street photography there's obviously an element of creation, of waiting for the elements to come together, but it's also a lot down to taking an image. And there's always that interesting divide between taking and making, and how that kind of plays into what you can control and what you can't control.
Exactly.
I couldn't do it.
Yeah, it's.
But we will have a street photographer on in the future, and we'll grill them on their technique.
Yeah, I think that would be an interesting conversation, and finding out how they handle their own internal struggle. I reckon it's a struggle to, the camera becomes heavy. Like, are you going to take this picture or not? That's how I felt running around London and taking pictures and looking back at the contact sheets, going, I am shit at this.
Oh dear.
Amazing.
Yeah. No, I hear you. But I think that's a good place to end it. So thank you so much for coming on today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and you've left us with some really good tips, little nuggets, as we like to call them. For our listeners.
You. I don't say nuggets. I say gems.
Okay,
we'll go with gems and nuggets.
Love it.
So yes, we really appreciate you coming on, and we will. If people want to find you, you are on Instagram as
Vahakn Vorperian, which is long. Spell that Vahakn Vorperian, very quick. But yeah, there's links on my website, the-retouchers.com. So if you want to check,
the-retouchers.com. That's where we can find you. Yeah, and all the information is on there. So once again, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you,
and really appreciate it.
No, thank you very much for asking me to be part of this, and hopefully it's interesting and not waffly.
No, it's been great. It's been great. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey guys, and thank you so much for listening to the latest episode. If you'd like to stay in touch, there are a number of options for you to reach out. We can be emailed at info@exposenegative.com, and you can find us on the website at exposenegative.com, or on Instagram at xnegative. We're pretty good at responding to DMs on there, and we're also on Twitter at exposenegative. You can find us personally on our own private accounts on Instagram. Tom is tombarnes.com, and I am just Greg Fennell. Cheers. Thanks for listening.